In 2005, students at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania were given a case study to them which seemed impossible. The case study that their professor gave them goes as follows. There was an old line steel company that had been producing steel for many, many, many years, when all of a sudden a new competitor had entered the industry. This new competitor had figured out a method of producing steel that was cheaper than they had. As a result, everybody was flocking to this new steel company because of how cheap they were able to produce. The students at Wharton faced the same decision as the CEO was. And that was, do they continue to produce steel as they'd always done? And eventually they would go bankrupt because the competition was stealing everybody from the market. Or option number two, they can invest in new technology, the same technology that their competition had. However, by investing in this new technology, it required such an initial down payment on these factories and such an initial amount of trial and error that they would also lose money. So either way, the students were faced with the challenge of which way, and the same CEO, of which way do you lose your money? When all of the students at Wharton had finally handed in their papers, the professor at Wharton had told them exactly what the CEO had done. The CEO said, we're going to build the factory anyway. When prompted why by the board of directors on why we're going to build the factory, he said, yes, 100% certainty, we are going to be losing money on the first factory we build. That's because we're going to have put so much trial and error into figuring out how to develop this factory that we're going to lose money. But we're not just going to stop at one factory. No, we're going to build the second factory. And by building that second factory, we'll have learned enough from the first factory in order to break even. By the time we approach factory number 3, we'll have learned so much from factories number 1 and 2 that eventually we're going to make profit, tremendous profit. That company went on to become one of the steel producer in Britain of the time. Now, what does this talk have to do with AI? Well, all of us here have been told the same thing that CEO was. You're gonna lose a lot of money. You're gonna have a job. Or your job's gonna be taken by AI as a result. Why? Because everybody says if AI could be more efficient than you, what's the purpose of you? That CEO is faced with the decision of losing money one way by going bankrupt, or losing money, decision number 2, by investing in a factory and losing money. All of us here have been told a similar two-path. Either there's going to be no job available for you in the job market because AI will have taken it, or if you do manage to get a job somehow, AI is going to take it right away from you. And I think just as that CEO had those two options, and he chose a line in between them, and he chose something that was a method of figuring out what to do when those options were on the table, so too AI is. And the same thing happened with spreadsheets. Dr. Torsten Slock of Apollo Global Management brings up the case of spreadsheets. For years, people thought the entire purpose of an accountant was simply to do simple calculations on a legal pad and paper. And now with spreadsheets, there's no point of that, because if spreadsheets could do all the math for the accountant, what's the point of having the accountant in the first place? However, we can clearly see this is not the case, as by the amount of accountants has continuously gone up. The reason for this is because what the accountants provided was not simply adding numbers. It was not being a human calculator. It was taking that output from the math and figuring out how to apply it to real-world situations. It was never just about calculating, but rather taking that number, figuring out, should we hire more people? Do we have to cut some people? Where exactly do we need to do in order to maximize the financial stability of the company? And now that we had spreadsheets, we were able to remove that burden on the human so that they could just focus on applying many more real-world situations into figuring out exactly how to maximize what they were doing. This concept of maximizing efficiency is something known as Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox states when something becomes more efficient, people use more of it, not less of it. The example is given with coal. Everybody thought that when machinery became much more efficient, we would use less coal, as now we needed 50% less coal in order to run a steam engine or another machine. But rather, people use even more coal. Why? Because when something becomes more efficient, you want to use more of it. If it takes you an hour to get from point A to point B, you could travel even further, B to C. Now that you have this increased efficiency with the produce of coal. And the same thing is with AI. The same thing is with AI. I learned my own story of Jevons paradox last summer when I was interning at 16 years old in a New York City financial company. My job consisted like this. It was I would go into the office, I would get my stuff ready, and I would start researching companies and trying to identify people from these companies. It was all research. 90% of my job was research before I would finally reach out to the person and tell them the service that we were offering. And many times the person was simply not interested in what we had to provide. So I engrossed myself in AI. I said, what if AI can make me more efficient? Not replace me, make me more efficient, just as spreadsheets made those very same accountants much more efficient. And that's exactly what I did. I drove so far into AI, I figured out how to have AI autonomously look up companies, LLCs, and when an LLC is formed, there's a representative that represents that LLC. It's somebody who says, I'm the representation of that company. So I had AI agents search for those LLCs, then find out who are the representatives of those LLCs, then eventually find out the phone numbers of those LLCs in order so I can make contact with them. And I became extremely efficient by that. My job, instead of turning from 90% research, turned from 90% reaching out and 10% research, a complete transformation. AI had not just replaced what I'd done, but it made me so much more efficient. After that summer, I decided that based on what I'd seen, there was clearly a need for this, a need for improving efficiency in the market. So I founded my own AI startup, all alone, a single person, and on the basis of improving efficiencies in companies. Eventually, we continued to build automations until we landed a healthcare provider, and we currently power over 10,000 patients across the United States managing healthcare infrastructure. And I was all 16 when I did this. Additionally, after that, we went into the financial space and we said, hey, how could we improve efficiency there as well? Now today, that same company works with billion-dollar New York City financial firms into improving their efficiency. I myself am not alone with building out AI startups and companies. As you can see, in 2020, the amount of companies founded skyrocketed. Why? Well, because that was when the first LLM, OpenAI, ChatGPT's model came out. Before OpenAI and ChatGPT, and if you wanted to found a company or if you wanted to create a company, it was so much more difficult. You had to have a marketer, somebody who could generate nice-looking advertisements for you, figure out how to reach out to people. But now that you had ChatGPT, all you had to do is input a simple prompt. Make me a good ad campaign. What should I do here? It acted as an entire team for you. As a result, this removed any reason why companies should not start up, but rather they should. And this is what led to that massive spike. All of us here, we have these little lines that in between of what we're currently doing. And if we can understand the deeper part of what we're doing, how to improve that efficiency, but not let AI take over you, but by implementing AI to make you even more efficient, we to ourselves will be like that CEO. We will not just come to failure and say, we're going to lose here. There's nothing we can do, but rather we'll take away from this. And we're going to become so efficient and figure out how to maximize every single ounce of what we do, just as that CEO turned such a horrible situation into making economic profit and becoming the leading steel industry in Britain. Thank you.